Welcome back to another episode of Banish The Doubt, everybody. I just heard a story and I felt absolutely inspired to go ahead and make this video because my last video I just made was about excuses and really tapping into who you are, who that person is, a voice on the inside, and really understanding how when we do this, we live from a certain passion and a willingness and an alignment. So my story here for you, I just heard, really sort of parallels this. But this story, what you're about to hear, is the type of story that when you do hear them, you realize never again excuses or challenges or talk about things of that nature. When we are in alignment with our source, when we have a willingness to go after what we want or align with that and say, yes, I'm going to do that. And then we have a passion. We hear stories of people with passion. And this story is about a young man named Dan Caro, C-A-R-O. Dan was born in 1979. And in 1982, on St. Patrick's Day, Dan was playing around and his mom was watching him. And Dan scooted out to the garage where he saw a container of gasoline and it tipped over. And there was a hot water heater nearby with a pilot. And instantly it exploded. And it just a sea of fire just, and suddenly Dan was burnt in over 75 to 80% of his body. And he had to undergo over 80 surgeries at the Shriners Hospital in Boston. And he was just completely scarred. And the story goes, when they were unwrapping his arms, after all this different therapy, when they started to unwrap his arms, his hand fell off. And they started unwrapping the other arm, and his fingers fell off. And they started unwrapping his legs, and his toes fell off. And they didn't think he would live much more past maybe 3 years old. But Dan had a passion. Dan, as he got older, he had a passion to be a musician. His father was a musician, and I mean, he lived in New Orleans, it's the great jazz area. So Dan, he had this passion to live and to be a musician, a drummer no less. He had no hands. So he got a little older, and I watched him come out on stage during this show, this story. And he addressed the audience, and he had no hands. And he talked about how he was able to have a thumb. I forget exactly how, but he got a thumb on one hand. And he talked about how he was in kindergarten, and with the thumb, it was challenging, he said, to tie his shoelaces, but he felt as though, because of his disfigurement due to all these surgeries, that he had to be equal to or better than his peers. And he said he started tying his shoelaces, but he couldn't make them tight. And he would try it over and over and over and over again. And then he said he remembers specifically, he said when he was 12 years old, He was in the sixth grade, and he said he remembers vividly. He bent down to tie his shoelaces, and finally, he said he was able to hold them tight. And he said at that moment he felt such. He said he had felt this power, this something come over him when he was in kindergarten, and then the same something came over him when he was 12 years old, and he was able to finally pull his shoelaces tight. And I watched this now a little more than a young man play the drums. He was written up in Modern Drummer magazine for how well he plays the drums. So this amazing story of this man, Dan Caro, Caro. You may want, if you want to look him up on Google. When you see and you hear stories like this, it just does something. And we look on, and again, this is Sunday afternoon. And for whenever you're watching this, if you're watching this Sunday or whatever, just think about this every time this young man who plays drums, who has no toes, he has no fingers, no hand, and he's able to play the drums and play them just as well as any drummer in a rock band today, because he had this passion, he had this willingness, he had this alignment. No excuses. And he talks about that when he gave his talk for a few minutes. He talked about he hears people with excuses and he thinks, seriously? So that's my message for you this afternoon. No more excuses. When you tap into that, when you feel that inside, that power, that feeling inside of you welling up, aligning, that who you are on the inside, that alignment, you align with that, you get a willingness to follow that, the trust to follow that gut feeling that you know what I'm talking about. You out there who have been putting off writing a book, write the book. You out there who've maybe been putting off asking him or her out on a date, ask them out on a date. You're starting a business, start the business. Go on faith, go on that willingness, that alignment, that passion. Live every day. As Joe Dispenza says, when you wake up in the morning, if you're not being defined by a vision of the future, you're left with the crappy old memories of the past. Stop being the hamster on the wheel. Step off the wheel. Chart your own course. Be a Dan Caro. Don't give a crap whatever else anybody else thinks. You follow your passion. You have this I'm going to do it regardless attitude. That's my message for you this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Be a Dan Caro in your own life. Thank you. God bless you, and enjoy the rest of your day.